Hi everybody, it's Thomas here from Thomas Fitzgerald Photography. Welcome back to the channel. So a couple of weeks ago I was in Edinburgh and I shot this photograph. So I think it's actually pretty decent. It's got kind of winter vibes going on and it still has a little bit of kind of cozy warmth on the castle. It's the kind of thing that you could probably use for, say, oh, I don't know, maybe an ad for whiskey or a hotel or something. But here's the thing. I didn't actually shoot it like this. It was actually started off as this rather terrible photo. So how did we get from that to this? Well, that's what we're going to go through in this video. I'm going to walk you through all the steps I took. We started off in Lightroom, we went through Photoshop, we used a couple of plugins, and along the way I hope you learned some new techniques and you might find it interesting. So this is going to be a pretty long video. I'm going to put in lots of chapters and so you can skip ahead through bits you already know. Okay, so let's get going. So let me start off. As you can see, this was a rather terrible photo. And when I shot this, I was in Edinburgh for a week and the weather was terrible. And I'm underselling that. It was raining the whole time, it was cold, at one point it was snowing. But more than that, it was really dark. So when I shot this, I shot it to exposed to the right, so the sky is just kind of bumping up against the histogram. But if I was to show you what it actually looked like, it was probably something more like this. So like that's basically midday. It was really dark and miserable. So at one point I was just like, I'm just going to have to shoot something. So I went out and got the best I could. It's far from perfect, but with a little bit of editing, we can fix it. So the first thing you want to do is we want to kind of bring down the sky and bring up the castle. So you might be tempted to jump in and kind of bring down the highlights, bring up the shadows, maybe add a bit of clarity, add a bit of contrast. And while that's okay, you start to run into a bit of trouble, especially if you add too much clarity. You'll start to get halos and stuff, so we don't want to do that. So I'm going to reset this, and what you want to start with is going over to the masks, and we're going to add a sky, and we're just going to drop the exposure down just to bring the sky back into visual range. And we're also going to add a little bit of a negative curve here. And so that's the sky kind of back into range, but we'll do more with it in a minute. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate and invert this mask. Okay, so now we're editing everything but the sky, and we're just going to add a bit of contrast. We're going to bring the exposure up slightly. And then if we pop down, and we can add a bit of clarity here. Just a small amount, we don't want to do too much. And then we're also going to add a bit of dehaze, because what this does is it adds a bit of richness back into the image. And even as it is, you can see we're already starting to look a bit better. So I'm going to pop back over to the main controls here, and what I want to do is warm the whole thing up a bit. So maybe somewhere around here. We don't want to go too far because I don't want to lose the kind of cool wintry feel to it. Okay, so we're starting to look a lot better. Now that we've kind of separated the foreground and the sky, we can do some kind of overall adjustments as well. So just a little tiny bit here. Maybe bring up the vibrance a bit. A little bit of contrast, and what I want to do is add just a bit more cool tones back into the shadows and maybe kind of warm up the midtones a bit, so we'll use the color grading tool for that. Okay, so we're looking better. I'm also going to add a bit of a vignette, so something like that. And what the vignette does is it focuses our attention in on the castle. And also too, some of these colors are a bit much, so what we're going to do is we're going to fix these. So I'm going to go back up to our color mixer, and we'll actually do point color on this, and we can sample them. And then we can just drop the saturation slightly. We don't want to do it too much, we don't want to like totally get rid of the greens. And again, just drop the saturation slightly and maybe the luminance slightly as well. Okay, so that's looking better. So we can now go back and do a bit more to our sky and our castle. And we're going to pop back over to the masks again, and this time we're going to add just a straight up linear gradient. So something like so. and if we pop down, and this time we're not really going to do exposure, we're just going to use the curves tool. So if you ever want to darken skies like this, the curves tool works better than using the exposure, and already we're looking a lot better. So I'm going to do another mask, and this time I'm going to go select subject. Okay, and this has selected the castle. So I want to add a bit more detail into the castle. So again, we'll go back down, and this time we'll add a tiny bit of texture and a little bit more clarity. Okay, and you can see that's bringing it up quite a bit. So again, if we go before and after, you can see it's already dramatically better than what we had it. Okay, so we're almost there in Lightroom. There's two things that are annoying me still about this. And the first is, we have this car here, which is kind of annoying. Let's get rid of the car, and that's fairly straightforward. Just pop over to the erase tool, and we'll zoom out a bit, and we'll just do that. And we kind of want to get relatively close to the car with just a little bit around it. And we'll hit remove, and let Adobe's wonderful generative AI do its thing. Okay, that's perfect. First go. Don't need to do any more to that. Okay, and we'll just update our mask. So there's a slight bit of perspective going on here. It's not a huge amount, but it's just enough to be annoying if you're picky like me. Okay, so to do this, all we have to do is pop down to the upright tool. Now, I could just hit auto, and it actually does an okay job, but over here is still a little bit off. So I'm going to do it manually. And so go back to off, and we want to zoom in. And when you're doing this, you have to be really precise or it won't work. So we'll just go down like so. I have a feeling this is not going to work, but we can fix it. Okay, so if I pop that off, I'm using the edge of the toolbar here as the tool palette as a ruler, so you can see it's really straight. And then on the other side, I mean, it's not perfect, but the wall's curved. So I'm just going to add a bit more midtones here and warm it up a little bit more. It's a bit noisy, so I'm going to use denoise on this. Now, the reason this is noisy is because I was protecting for the sky, basically most of the image was in this bottom part of the histogram. So even though this is a pretty good camera, it's a R6 Mark II, in fact it's what I'm filming this on, you're still going to get noise because you're bringing it up so much. But denoise does a pretty impressive job, and we will add some grain back in later at the end. Okay, so we're pretty much done now in Lightroom for now. So let's pop over to Photoshop. So I'm going to go edit in, and I want to open a smart object in Photoshop. So you might be saying to yourself, why would somebody shoot something like this in the first place? Why would you shoot something so badly? But you see, here's the thing. If you're on a commercial shoot or an assignment, you don't always have the luxury of being able to wait around for days to get the perfect light and the perfect weather. And you just have to make do with what you have. And sometimes when the weather is so bad and the light is so bad, you end up with a shot like this, and you still have to just kind of make do with it. And that's where Photoshop comes in. So the first thing I want to do here in Photoshop is I'm going to use a plugin on this, and it's to do a very specific task. So I'm going to go Filter, Skylum Software, Luminar Neo. There's just a cool feature in the latest version of Luminar which is going to do exactly what I needed to do. You can probably do this with masking as well, but let me just show you. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to use a little bit of enhance on this. The AI enhance in Luminar is pretty good. It's not using generative AI, it's just kind of a smart enhance. And I'll bring that up a bit. And you can see that just adds a bit more detail into it without kind of overdoing it. But the function I really want to use is, if I can find it, is light depth. So what light depth does is it basically allows you to relight your scene based on the depth. So it creates a depth map, and you can control how much you basically want to focus the light on. And it works really well for this image, so I'm going to turn it up a bit. And down here in this part of the interface, we can just drag this up, and this controls whereabouts in our scene we want it to go. So I just want to affect the top of the castle, like so, and bring it up like so. And you can see that does a great job of just bringing up the castle and kind of hiding some of the other stuff in the front of it. So I'm really happy with that. So I'm going to click apply. let it do its thing. Okay, so that's our first plugin, and the next thing we want to do is I'm going to do like a very slight grade on it, and I want to give it a kind of a film tone. And for that, I'm going to go DxO Labs Film Pack 8. So I'm going to use this preset here, which is Kodak Elite Chrome. It's one of the defaults. I actually used to shoot Elite Chrome all the time when I shot film. It was my favorite film. Elite Chrome was a slide film, and it was really, really nice. The one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here and customize it, and I want to turn the grain off first because I want to add grain at the very last step. Okay, so let me just save this out. Okay, so now we have our image, and if we go back to their history palette here, we can see this is where we started in Photoshop, and this is where we are now. So it's looking good. So the next thing I want to do is, again, I want to still kind of focus things in a little bit more. So I'm going to add another vignette, but I'm going to do a different technique for doing this one. And so I'm going to start by drawing out a marquee like so. And then I actually have an action for this, but I'm going to do it manually. Basically, what you do is you go and add a curves adjustment layer and bring it down like so. And then what we want to do is pop into the mask tools, and we want to invert the mask and then turn the feather right up. So we end up with something like this. Okay, so that might be a little bit too much, so we can actually just knock that back a bit by dropping the opacity. I'm going to drop it down to like 75%. Okay, so I'm going to zoom out a bit just so I can get a better overall look at it. Already, we're looking much better than we were. There's still a few things I want to do though. So this tree down here is still catching my attention and taking it away from the castle. And then the other thing is the overall composition of this isn't perfect. I would have liked the castle to be a bit higher in frame, so it's kind of almost on the rule of thirds line. And the reason I didn't was because I was taking this from the street and there was loads of people in front of me, so I couldn't actually pan down any further. But we can fix that. But first, the first thing I want to do is I want to kind of deal with this tree. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do two things, and to do that, the first thing I want to do is I'm going to flatten this image. So I don't need it to be editable anymore because we've done what we need to do with that side of things. So I'm just going to flatten it. It makes life a bit easier. Okay, so now I want to go. I'm going to duplicate the layer though, just so we have a backup. And to duplicate a layer in Photoshop, it's Command J, just in case you didn't know. Okay, so what I want to do is filter, blur gallery, and we're going to do a tilt shift blur. And what we want to do is bring this down so that it's just here, like so. And I'm going to bring this section right up because we don't actually do it into the sky. I want to keep a bit of the texture in the sky. And then we're going to turn this right down to something like 4. Because all we want to do is just slightly defocus it. We don't want to totally get rid of it. And bring it up like so. And we'll darken it down a bit in a second as well. So just click OK on that. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new layer, and I'm going to go to the brush tool, and we want a fairly big brush, and I'm just going to brush black over like so, and then I'm going to blur this, so filter, blur, Gaussian blur, like so, and turn it up quite a bit. We want it quite soft. And then I'm going to set the blend mode here to color burn, and we're going to drop the opacity down to about somewhere around there. So this is darkening the image nicely, but it's not overdoing it, and it still looks fairly natural. Okay, so we're almost there. This is looking really in the ballpark now, but there's still a few more things we're going to do to it. And the first thing I want to do is fix this crop. So I'm going to go over to the crop tool and click on the crop tool. And all I want to do is just bring it to about there. I think that just frames it just that little bit better. And we just hit on generative expand, and we're going to check the model and make sure we're using Firefly Fill and Expand. So this is in the latest version of Photoshop. It was added in January 26. So just make sure you're using that version because the other versions are not as good. Okay, close that, click generate. One of the reasons I flattened this earlier was if you haven't flattened it, if you still have active layers with a whole bunch of plugins in it, it takes ages because I have to run through all the plugins again. So just flattening it saves a lot of time. Okay, so we can check through the variations here just to see which one is the best. I mean, they're all pretty good because it's fairly dark in the corner, so you don't really see anything. But it reframes it nicely. Okay, so the next thing we want to do, we're almost there. Stay with me, people. The next thing we want to do is add a bit of snow. I searched through iStock Photo trying to find some snow. It's actually very hard to find some snow, but I did find a good image, and I will put a link to that in the description below. So it's actually not snow, it's actually water, but it works better than most of the snow images I could find, so but we'll go with this. Okay, so I'm just going to drag it up and fill the frame like so, and then we want to set our screen mode to screen. Okay, so what screen does is it just kind of gets rid of all the black, and then we're going to drop the opacity right down to something like there. We actually want this fairly low. It's just more of a hint of it. And then I'm going to go in here. I'm going to double click on the layer, just not on the name, the actual layer, and this will bring up our layer style options. And you want here on the underlying layer, we want to drag this up and then hold down the option key to split the slider and drag it up to something like that, and then you can bring that right back down. Okay, so what that does is it blends it where it's black so that it's not kind of too much in the foreground. And then we're going to do the same with the top. Okay, and you can play around with the opacity until you get it to where you want it. So something like so. Okay, that's looking pretty good. And the other thing I want to do with this is it's a bit too sharp for the overall image, so what we're going to do is we're going to blur it slightly. So we go back into our old friend blur gallery. So this time we're going to do tilt shift on this again, and we'll just drag this up like so, and we don't want too much, we just knock this back down. And then we're also going to add an iris blur. And so if we click on this settings and you want to drag this right out and bring these back in and do something like this. So you want it somewhere like this, and again we don't want it much, we just want a little bit. So even down to something as low as 4. So if I turn preview off, you can see it's just taken the sharpness out of it and it makes it that little bit better. So I'm going to click OK. Okay, so we're looking a lot better now. We have our nice snow in the image. I'm still not overly happy with the castle, so what I want to do is I'm just going to add a little bit more detail into it. So I'm going to use the clarity and dehaze adjustment layer, and this is fairly new in Photoshop. So we just add this back in and we'll turn up our clarity a bit. And what we want to do is invert the mask and then use the paint tool and then just paint it on, just kind of over some of the castle and the rocks here. So something like that. That's immediately better. Okay, and then it's, you know, it's still a bit dark, so, or it's still a bit cold on the castle wall, so I can bring that up a bit by using, we'll go to our curves tool. Okay, and we'll stop over to red and just bring the red up ever so slightly. And bring the green up ever so slightly, and bring the blue down just a smidgen, just a tiny bit like that. And then again, what we do now is we want this to basically use the same as the clarity and dehaze and the same mask. So all you have to do is hold down the option key and click on it, and it will limit it to that. And if it's still a bit much, you can just drop this down a bit. Okay, so that's not bad. We're getting there. So we zoom back in a bit. So the other thing I want to do is, if you notice, there's a couple of windows here, and I just want to increase the glow on these a bit. So all we have to do is create a new layer, and we go back to our brush tool. Actually, we're still on our brush tool, and just drop this right down, and then we just need to pick the color. So we can just go into the color picker and then just pick the orange, and then we want maybe a bit brighter, so something like that. Maybe a bit more red, and So just paint over the windows. So you just want to basically paint a glow onto it. So something like that. You don't have to be too much with it. And then all I have to do is blur it. So filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and we don't too high. So something like maybe a little bit more. Okay. And then just set this to hard light and then drop the opacity back to somewhere like that. Okay, that's looking a lot better. I'm not 100% happy with this snow yet, so I want to darken it down a bit. So we're going to do our vignette trick again. So this time we'll do this, and I'm going to use my action this time. I will try and put the action on my website and have a link in the video below. Okay, so I'm just going to run this. Okay, and that's just darkened everything down again, but I want to limit this to the snow layer, so I'm just going to click on that. Okay, so that's just darkened the snow a bit, and I think that's a lot better. You can tweak this indefinitely until you get it right, but I think that's looking good. Okay, and then one final thing we're going to do is we're just going to add some grain over the whole top of the whole image. So we go into our adjustment layers again, and this time we want to add grain. And again, this is another new thing. This was only added recently, I think, in the January release. So the controls are basically the same grain controls that you have in Lightroom. So we're doing something like this, and generally you should zoom into 100% when you're adjusting your grain. Something like so. So that's not bad. Overall the image is probably a little bit heavily processed. I'm going to merge these layers, like so. I'm going to duplicate that. Okay, and it's got a bit overly sharpened, so I'm just going to soften it ever so slightly. So to do that, we just go blur, Gaussian blur, and you want 0.5. Okay, and that just softens it ever so slightly and takes kind of away that half edge, and then you can knock that back to 50%, and that will solve your over sharpening problem. See, I'm full of tricks. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. I think that's looking good. If we compare to the one we did earlier, let's see how we got on. So it's not exactly the same, but it's not bad. So funny story, I've actually done this about 5 times now. I did it once or twice to practice with. Then I recorded this video 3 times. This is actually the 3rd time I've recorded this video, because the first time I made a total mess of it. The second time, the audio didn't work for some reason. So the 3rd time, we're almost there. Please let me make it to the end. Okay, so I'm going to save that, pop back over to Lightroom. We're back in Lightroom, and I'm just going to go to my print modules to see what it would look like printed. And there we have it. There is our winter version of Edinburgh Castle, starting from a terrible image and ending in not a bad image, if I do say so myself. So there you have it. That's pretty much it. That is our step-by-step process of how I edited this image. I hope you have found this useful. I know it was kind of a long one, and thanks for anybody who's still with me. So yeah, if you've liked this, please give it a like, share, and subscribe to the channel, and we shall see you in the next video. Bye.